when the baby bonus first came in, it was actually a tax concession.
This is the first child tax refund.
Yeah, well, basically,
This is in 2002, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Basically, the idea was we're trying to help new families, and the idea was if you went out of the workforce, right, you lost the tax-free threshold, right, that you would have got for the years you're at home raising a child. So we give you a tax break. This is how it all started off. You get $2,500, but you had to apply for it, subject to income tests and all the rest of it. And the take-up was very weak. And I was just thinking to myself, we got that baby bonus, which is basically a tax break. We used to have a maternity allowance. We used to have an immunisation allowance, different qualifications, different income tests, different ways of claiming it. So we've got to cut through all of this. And, I'll get rid of all of the income tests and I'll get rid of all of the different rates. We'll just have one thing, universal, on the birth of a child. And so I added up all the benefits that then existed, and I think it was $3,000. $3,000.
Yeah.
Lump sum, $3,000, kaboom. Actually, didn't even call it the baby bonus, It was called a maternity payment. When it came in. And so it was simple, universal, right. And I remember, this is how politics gets made. So I'm in the pre-budget press conference and a journalist said to me, but I've already had my kids. I'm going to be locked out of this. And I said, well, how many you got? And the journalist said, well, I've got 2. And I said, well, why don't you have one for the country? Right? And that's how it happened in the press conference. It's not in the budget speech. It's not in the budget. I just said in a press conference, have one for the country. I got into a lot of trouble from that because, someone on my staff said, you shouldn't encourage journalists to breed, right? And that's how it happened. And then it sort of got into the press, have one for the country. And the British press picked it up. One of the papers over there, might have been the Daily Mail, one of those papers. And they covered the budget under the headline. I'll never forget this. Australian Treasurer says bonk down under. Right? That was the headline, right? So the British press, then it gets pushed back to Australia, they push back to Britain. And that's how it all happened, right? Yeah. So it wasn't actually at all, a measure to increase fertility. It was a rationalisation of all these other programs into one lump sum, which would be universal.
Interesting.
Now, alongside of that, we had published the intergenerational report a couple of years before and alerted Australia, I think, for the first time to the danger of the ageing of the population and the declining fertility rate. So, I was saying we had to arrest the declining fertility rate, and I was also saying we've simplified the maternity payment, right? and the two get conflated together. And it became sort of like a little sort of humorous anecdote of Australian political life. Now, the interesting thing is, much to my amazement, in fact, the fertility rate did kick up, right? So it wasn't done to kick the fertility rate up. I think it had an effect. But I think the most important thing was not the bonus itself. The most important thing is we talked about the need to arrest the decline of the fertility rate. I think it was talking about the issue, talking about how the declining fertility rate would affect us badly, talking about how it would be good for society if we could arrest the declining fertility rate. And the baby bonus just kind of fitted in with that narrative. But I think it was the narrative that actually had an effect.
Yeah, interesting.
I think you could introduce a baby bonus tomorrow, right? And it wouldn't have any effect at all, right? Because unless somebody's talking about fertility, unless somebody's talking about the effect it will have on society, it wouldn't go anywhere. It'd just be another benefit. But I think it was the tilling of the ground with the intergenerational report, the talking about it, and then this other thing comes along and the two just get conflated and off we go.
So firstly, that's very interesting to learn that influencing the fertility rate wasn't the main original rationale. No. On the importance of the narrative, there's been some excellent new research by E61 on the baby bonus, and this wasn't the main finding, but one of the things I noticed in their research was that the biggest percentage increase was for third births, which is consistent with the narrative being important, because that's obviously the one.
Absolutely, that's the one for the country, right? So if you're thinking about arresting the fertility rate, if a family has two, well, replacement level is 2.1, right? That doesn't get us back to replacement level. The only way, on average, of getting back to replacement level would be if we had, on average, 3. And obviously, people who know how to have kids and enjoy kids and have 2, they're probably the people that are most receptive to having 3. And when you actually look at what happened, it was people having the third one, or sometimes 4th, 5th. People would come up to me in the street. I've had one for the country, I've had one for the country. Oh, fantastic, bro. Good on you, But they weren't doing it to get a baby bonus. Nobody in their right mind would say, oh, well, I have a child, which has cost you, I don't know, $1 million or more over its lifetime, to get a $3,000 bonus. I don't think that was the point at all. I think the point was, the message was, it's good for society, it's good for you. Don't feel bad about being out of the workforce and having kids. Right? You're actually doing a good thing for you, and it's going to help us all if you do it. I think it was the message that made a difference.
So the E61 research pleasantly surprised me in a couple of ways. Let me tell you what they were and then why I was generally excited by it. Firstly, it showed that the baby bonus created counterfactual babies rather than just bringing births forward.
It's a funny expression, counterfactual babies.
Yeah, it's not the most romantic.
I don't know what a counterfactual baby is, but still go on.
So births that wouldn't have happened anyway. And a couple of reasons we can be fairly confident about that. One is that birth spacing didn't change, and secondly, there was a big jump in the number of births exactly 9 months after the announcement. And so births increased by about 6.5%. The second big update for me was it was much more cost effective than I was expecting. So the cost of an additional baby using the $3,000 price, the $3,000 benefit was about $50,000 in 2004 terms, I think $86,000 in 2025 terms. The reason I was excited by this is I think global fertility declines is a big, mysterious problem. We don't quite know what's driving it. It's even affecting countries like India now. It doesn't seem to have a simple explanation about the opportunity cost of having kids increasing. It seems like there are these broader cultural forces at play. And there's this question of, can we use policy to influence the fertility rate? And this seems to be, we need lots of experiments around the world to help us answer that question. And this seems to be quite an interesting and important experiment. To some people, that might seem like an expensive price tag for a counterfactual baby, but I don't think it really is. And at least we know what it might cost to save civilization. So I was quite excited to see that. I don't know if you had any reactions to the research.
Well, you see, undoubtedly there is. We first of all arrest the decline in fertility in 2004, and then we sort of marginally tick it up. This is very unusual. Now, I've heard people come up with all sorts of explanations as to why that happened. And then when the government changed, Labor dismantled that whole program, and you see it go down again. Something happened to the TFO, the total fertility rate, between 2004 and 2008. You can come up with a lot of explanations. I've never really heard a satisfactory answer that doesn't involve the baby bonus and the intergenerational report. I think somehow it is related to the intergenerational report and the baby bonus, right?
Yeah.
I'm not saying totally, but somehow. There's no explanation that can exclude them. And then of course, we were thrown out of government, Labor comes to government, it starts dismantling the baby bonus and it replaces it with paid parental leave. Right? Paid parental leave was much more expensive than the baby bonus ever was. And paid parental leave comes in and the fertility rate starts declining again. Now, I'm not criticising paid parental leave, but the one thing we can conclude is paid parental leave doesn't increase the fertility rate, right? Because we can see on the graphs, paid parental leave comes in and the fertility rate starts to decline. That's not to say we shouldn't have paid parental leave. I think we should have. But the one thing we can conclude is paid parental leave doesn't affect fertility. You can leave the question open, the baby bonus and the intergeneral pay may well, right? So, and this is the point I make, you want to look at the marginal cost of additional children. You say, oh, well, it's 50,000. I don't think that's the right way of looking at it, and certainly the baby bonus was never designed to actually do that. But what then is the marginal cost of paid parental leave, by the way, if it produces no additional children? What is the marginal cost? It must be infinity. It's the cost over zero. Right? Now, I don't think that's a reason to say paid parental leave's no good. I mean, because paid parental leave is not to produce more babies. It's to help people who are having babies. And that's exactly the way I would explain the baby bonus. It wasn't there to produce another child here or another child there. It was to amalgamate all of these payments and do it in a universal lump sum way. I think it may well have turned the fertility rate, but it was going to happen regardless of that. It was it was a simplification of these benefits. The fact that it might have had that result, that's good. Pleased about that. But you wouldn't just sort of measure its value on the number of additional kids alone.
Right.
That's my point.
Yeah. Although it wasn't the original rationale, did you start thinking about how it could be used as a tool to influence the fertility rate? And did you ever look into how feasible it would be to buy your way back above a replacement rate?
Look, because something undoubtedly happened between 2004 and 2008, people around the world have noticed this, right? This is one of the few Western countries that for a moment in time turned, probably the only one, turned the decline of the fertility rate. So, I have a lot of people from overseas come to see me about this, to talk about the experience, right? And it's noticed. It's so rare. It's so unusual. It's noticed around the world. And a lot of countries are trying to experiment. Now, I don't think, and I say to visiting ministers and visiting heads of government, I don't think you could introduce a baby bonus tomorrow and see your fertility rate tick up. In fact, if you reintroduced it in Australia tomorrow, I don't think anything would happen. That's not the key. The key actually, I think, is to talk about the issue and to talk about the importance of children and families and the contribution that they make, and to value them. Now, a bonus might just be a monetary way of saying we value children, but it's the message that we value children that's important to people, I think. And you can't get away from that, you know. If the attitude is, well, a child spoils your life, it sort of interrupts your career, it costs you $1 million, you know, you've got to buy a new car because, you know, your car's not big enough, or build a new bedroom because your house is not big enough, or, you know, pay for childcare. If the message of society is, you know, basically a child's a bit of a burden, and having children is hard, we all know that. But if the message is, you know, it's a bit of a burden, you know, don't be surprised if people have less of them. If the message becomes, actually, this is a good thing, it's a vote of confidence in our future, it's actually good for our society, it's going to prevent the ageing of the population, then I think you might be in the business of arresting the decline. But it's the message that counts. It's not the dollar sum. That's the point I always make to these visiting people. And, you know, we got much more benefits for kids now than we did in my day. We didn't have paid parental leave, right? Childcare benefits are much bigger than they were in my day. But the fertility rate's still declining because it's not really a monetary thing. It's the message, I think, that's important here.
Which might imply that it's the cultural causes that are more important.
I think that's right.